From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capitol Connection.
Welcome to Capitol Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell, reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, July 19. Federal prosecutors scored a major victory in their ongoing corruption investigation into state lawmakers and power brokers here in Springfield this week. On Friday, the U.S. attorney from the Northern District announced that ComEd would admit to its role in paying associates of Speaker Michael Madigan $1.3 million all told in payments that were often disguised as salaries or vendor subcontracts. In return, court documents claim that ComEd won $150 million or more in benefits as the state house that Madigan controlled passed new laws allowing that company to charge its customers higher rates on their electric bills. The company will now pay $200 million in fines to avoid criminal charges. It has also agreed to cooperate in the ongoing criminal investigation. Speaker Madigan now facing increasing and mounting calls for him to resign. Among them, House Republican leader Jim Durkin, Senate Democrat Melinda Bush, and Senate Republican leader Bill Brady, all echoing their calls that the Speaker should step down, including calls from Governor Pritzker himself if these claims are true. But Speaker Madigan didn't become the longest tenured Speaker in American history by simply caving at the first signs of public pressure. The man, widely known as the Velvet Hammer, indicated on Friday that he has no immediate plans to step down if it's up to him.
Public official A controlled what measures were called for a vote in the Illinois House of Representatives.
That description only fits one person, Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. Friday afternoon, federal prosecutor John Lausch described an insider deal between Illinois' biggest power brokers and biggest power company.
ComEd admitted that it arranged for jobs and vendor subcontracts for public officials A's political allies and workers, and that those people performed little to no work that they were purportedly hired to perform. ComEd also acknowledged that he made these payments to these political associates and workers in order to influence and reward public official A's efforts to assist ComEd with legislation.
If these allegations of wrongdoing by the Speaker are true, there is no question that he will have betrayed the public trust, and he must resign, therefore.
We asked Speaker Madigan if those accusations were true back in October of 2019.
Mr. Speaker, so we're going to recommend anyone to work for ComEd or anyone. Do you ever refer someone?
No. The spokesperson appears to walk back, issuing a more specific statement saying, quote, the Speaker has never helped someone find a job with the expectation that the person would not be asked to perform work by their employer, adding he has never made a legislative decision with improper motives and has engaged in no wrongdoing here. Joining us now to help break down and analyze what we've learned in the whirlwind that came on Friday to Springfield and to Speaker Madigan's offices in Chicago is former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. He also was a Democratic primary challenger to our current Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, after Speaker Madigan's own daughter vacated that office in 2018. So familiar with Illinois politics. It's good to have you with us. What was the first thing that stood out to you when you read the deferred prosecution, which is this deal? $200 million is a pretty large fine, but it barely eclipses the profit or the revenue that ComEd was able to charge in higher rates to its electric bill customers. What did you make of, first of all, that assessment, that fine that the feds are slapping ComEd with?
Well, it's a significant fine. I mean, one thing I'll tell you is we can scoff at the money, but $200 million is a lot of money to everybody. And I don't think ComEd would be paying it unless they were convinced that there was very significant evidence that proved that there was this bribery scheme. So I think it told me that the feds had a strong case. I think what jumped out at me was the detailed factual statement that was included with it. I don't think that my former colleagues needed to be quite that detailed if they didn't want to be. And I think that they did that in part to send a message. I think a lot of what was going on here with the release of the deferred prosecution agreement and then with the subpoena that was also served was to send a message that they're going after Speaker Madigan, that they're building a case, and to try to convince or sway people close to the Speaker to cooperate with the feds.
Now, ComEd has since fired or parted ways with a number of Speaker Madigan's close confidants and associates and political workers who had been taken on the payroll. That's at the core of this entire bribery or corruption case. As I read that document, is it how you read it as well, that any of those now former employees are not shielded by this agreement? Are they still liable for criminal prosecution?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, other than the entity itself, the ComEd entity, everyone else is fair game. So potentially ComEd senior staff, presumably they have their own attorneys and they're concerned about being charged. The lobbyist that's referred to in the document is presumably concerned. Other individuals that are referred to in the documents, of course, I think all of those individuals need to be concerned. Those individuals, it really looks like for some of them in particular that they're going to be charged, or just that would be my read of the document. What isn't clear, of course, is whether there's sufficient evidence to charge Speaker Madigan.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really caught my attention. You were on Twitter and analyzing this in a long thread, and you mentioned that just because ComEd cops to corruption doesn't necessarily mean, or that's not the same thing as the feds right now having sufficient evidence in court to indict Speaker Madigan, and perhaps they're still trying to build that case. But as the feds do this, it seems they're also making a point that Mike McLean is referenced in these documents. He's telling a ComEd executive, don't put anything in writing because all that can do is hurt you. How much does that factor in to a jury or to in the eyes of the prosecutors as they go forward here? Does that help make their case that just because something isn't in a document that's not produced by this subpoena or these search warrants, that there may still have been corruption just because it wasn't spelled out? Can they still prove it some other way, and how hard is that to do?
Well, you certainly can prove corruption when it isn't written down. Of course, we saw that with former Governor Blagojevich, right? It was his own words that were recorded that were used against him when he was talking about something being bleeping golden. It wasn't written down; it was spoken. Of course, the challenge is, unless you do have a wiretap, like we saw in the Burke case or in the Blagojevich case, it can be very difficult to make that case. And really, I think that is the issue that, and I think the wall potentially that the feds have come up against. In other words, yeah, if people are emails are a federal prosecutor's best friend, IMs, things like that. But if you don't have that, if you don't have anything in writing, then it really comes down to needing either recordings based on wiretaps, or you really need eyewitness testimony. You need insiders, people like McLean testifying and saying, yes, I took part in this scheme and Mike Madigan knew and I had these conversations with him. If they don't have somebody that's going to say that, it can be very hard to prove that Madigan himself was a knowing participant, which is what they would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
And even with ComEd, an Exelon, its parent company, a multi-billion-dollar company, copping to this, admitting to it, confessing to it, in written testimony, agreeing to take their medicine, this $200 million fine, that alone isn't enough. A lot of people are watching this and saying, wait a minute, this is a massive company. They're admitting to this scheme. They said they did it. They said Mike McLean and Mike Madigan sought them out to put their people on the payroll here. That's not enough?
Well, it seemed to me from reading the document that Madigan was working through intermediaries, and that it was really these intermediaries that they were dealing with, not with Madigan himself. And in this country, if you charge somebody with a crime, you have to prove that they themselves were a knowing participant. And so I think certainly there's evidence that's outlined here that certain individuals were involved in this bribery scheme with ComEd, and I would expect that those people, at least some of those people, would be charged. I think the issue with Madigan is if there is such evidence, in other words, if my former colleagues who are very, very skilled and aggressive prosecutors, if they have that evidence, they're not showing their cards now. It's not public at this time. They are not putting it down there. And I will say, I wonder why not if they had it. In other words, if they really had it, why not just get a search warrant for his office like you did with Ed Burke? Why not just put out there this, even stronger evidence to try to get people to flip? So I don't know, but if I had to hazard a guess, I'd imagine that this is the evidence that they have now, and they don't have sufficient evidence to charge Madigan at this time.
And can you speak to the strategy of the prosecutors here as they try to build their case? They're sort of hedging, and they won't publicly say that in fact it is Speaker Madigan, but all the evidence points in that direction. The Speaker's office himself said, yes, we were delivered a subpoena and we're going to cooperate by handing over documents. Even if they don't put things in writing, they're going to comply and hand over those documents. But we know that there's a grand jury and that's where these subpoenas come from. What does that tell us about the strategy of the prosecution here? Could this be something beyond just simple corruption? Could there be a racketeering charge in here? And what's the distinction there or difference?
Well, look, the prosecutor who's leading this investigation is an extremely skilled and aggressive prosecutor who's been in the office a long time. And I think what he is doing is he has been putting pressure on various individuals and has been building his case. ComEd in this agreement, I think it's a victory for him. He got ComEd to surrender. They're giving up hundreds of millions of dollars, $200 million. They're fully cooperating. He's sending a message. I think what was going on today, with this set of actions by them, was them saying to the world, "We're going after Madigan. You better, if you don't cooperate with us now, you may lose your chance to do so, and we're going to come after you." And I think they're hoping that this, the going overt, as we would call it as federal prosecutors, this is going to potentially shake the tree, get them a way of breaking this open. There's going to be presumably other steps as well. They may charge individuals and so forth. But at this point, I think that's what they're trying to do.
All right, you've seen him on cable news analyzing a lot of other federal prosecutions going on. Renato Mariotti, a former federal prosecutor, joining us from Chicago. Thank you for giving us your insights here.
Thank you.
When we come back, a closer look at how the graduated income tax fight on November's ballot, at the ballot question there, is evolving as opponents try to convince voters to vote no. We're back in a moment.